Oh boy, do we have an event for you tonight. This is going to be absolutely epic. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kyle Curtis, joined always by Steve McRae, and this is Non Sequitur. And tonight we are doing the Legion of Atheists versus the Jesus League Infinity Questions War. Recently, we released a video with questions that we didn't think any Christian could answer. In the meantime, we've had several response videos. SJ and company did kind of a dissertation on the video. So we decided to kind of put different, well, actually, we've got very different, even theist beliefs. We've got a pagan. We've got, Tim, what would you say that you identify as?
It's a difficult question. The shorthand I use for myself is Pentecostal Lutheran, which I can explain in more detail at some point in the future. But essentially, I'm mainline in practice, but more, I don't know, conservative in my own personal practice, but pluralistic and open-minded as to other things. So it's an
Pentecostal
interesting
Lutheran
mixture.
is good. We'll go with that. Pentecostal Lutheran.
But
let's. If I can remember, I'm going to try to go through real quick and name off everybody that we've got in the call. We've got Tim, obviously, Ocean, SJ. We've got Dylan from Brilliant Doubt, Luciano, Paul, Heather, Craig, Godless Engineer, Service the Skeptic, Shannon Q, and that's everybody, right? Did I miss anybody?
Your fun producer.
I was getting to you. Don't worry. And David does need a shout out and a Xanax, based on the last couple minutes that we've had. Yeah, but obviously, David, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and do this. Remember, guys, coming up for the week, just real quick. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about censorship with Bunty King at 8. We've got the Covenant the next day with Bernard at 8 o'clock as well. And then the Flat Earth, Urine Therapy, Sovereign Citizen guy, Godless Engineer will be back with us for that. And that will be at 8 as well the next day. So that's all I'm going to do for right now so that we can kind of jump in and do this. And the way this is going to work, we're going to give 18 minutes to each question. We're going to play the question. We're going to let the theists state their case for that question. And then the atheists will respond in turn. We'll try to give them a 2-minute warning when we get close, but we've got to keep it at a tight 18 minutes so that we don't go over 2 hours and we can get to everybody's question. So if you would, guys, in the room, once again, please try not to talk over anybody. Adhere to that when you hear the 2-minute warning. Let's try to wrap it up. I know that's going to be difficult and it's going to be wild, but let's kind of keep that so that we can all get to everybody's question. Okay? Everybody good to go?
Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat saying nobody's in costume, and that's a little sad. I agree with this.
This is my costume.
Yeah, Steve's always
I'm a superhero 24/7, baby.
I'm wearing my Batman suit. I'm just not on camera.
Oh, I'm so disappointed now, Craig.
Okay.
I have my hammer. Does that count?
Yes, obviously. Vice Rhino was going to be with us. Unfortunately, he had to go pick up his kids, so we started a little late, and we were going to try to put him in early, but we're still going to do his question, and thank him once again for at least trying to be on with us. So we'll start with question number 1, which is from Vice Rhino.
That we have some audio issue. Hold on. Let me start that over. I just gotta connect. Did you guys hear that?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, I was hearing it partially.
Was he outside?
We heard it for a bit.
Yeah, it kind of cut off.
Well, while we're having a slight audio issue, but while we're fixing that, I just want to remind everybody, if you could just go to that little share thing next to the thumbs up, thumbs down, and get this link out there, we would be greatly appreciative of that, because this is going to be one of the best hangouts of all time, I have a feeling. So share it around. Spread it like herpes.
Epic. Spread it like herpes.
Maybe not like that.
That is from the theist. Shots fired from the theist side.
correct one.
If
I
God
just
is
repeated
all
what he
powerful
said.
and all loving, why does he require blood in order to grant forgiveness? Old Testament or New, something had to die before he could forgive anyone. Human beings can forgive each other without there being a death first. Why can't God?
Okay. From the theist side, who'd like to take this?
So I guess I'll give it a shot here. I'm not a theologian. My name's Heather, and I've been a Christian for about 40 years. And so, if you take a look at the issue of forgiveness, you have to ask what happens in a courtroom. If a criminal goes into a courtroom, do they just get off the hook? If they really are guilty. And so if you take a look at the human nature, we all fall short of God's holiness. And so there needs to be somebody who has paid the price for our sin. And that person, of course, is Jesus Christ. So that's how I see it. Like I said, a theologian, I'm sure, would see it a little bit differently. But that's pretty much my take on it.
If I may jump in a little bit here.
Sure.
So as to the Old Testament, it's a different question than the New Testament. The Old Testament, all the New Testament writers are going to consistently say, is symbols and signs and presaging. So animal sacrifice is just a means to foreshadow and to remind people. The question of Jesus' sacrifice depends upon where you fall on two different sides of a coin. Either he is the substitutionary, like Heather said, he's taking our punishment for us, or there's another line that I tend to favor a little bit more, which is the I love you this much theory. I am dying and sacrificing myself to demonstrate to you how much I want this reconciliation. It's not I'm paying a ransom as such. It's a affirmative statement of this is how much I care, and this is what I'm willing to do for you.
Can I give a more, I guess, theologian-y answer? In the Old Testament, you have the way that God designed law, and for whatever reason you decided to do this. And I'm not a Christian, so I don't necessarily know why the law was constructed in this way. But how the law is constructed in the Old Testament is that sins you have sacrifice as penance. As far as how Jesus figures into that, Jesus is supposed to be fulfilling the law completely by doing the ultimate sacrifice. So that's why we don't have any of the sacrificial laws anymore for Christianity, and a lot of the Old Testament isn't necessarily a lot of the Levitical law and Deuteronomical law numbers don't necessarily apply anymore because of the sacrifice that is meant to fulfill that law has already been taken. And that's New Covenant theology, which is what a lot of Protestants especially ascribe to. I don't know if you wanted to take the question back to why does God require blood sacrifice in the Old Testament. I don't necessarily have an answer for you as far as why, but as far as the function of Jesus and his relation to that, I think that's it. It's the fulfilling of the law.
Okay, let's hear from an atheist now. Who would like to step in for Vice Rhino and kind of give it an answer to those two or those three?
Well, since Paul is Vice Rhino and everybody knows that, I think that it
true,
should probably be.
Yeah, I'll pretend to be Vice Rhino. I know it's a big stretch.
Pretend.
So two things I noted while I was listening to those. The first is if Jesus' sacrifice was purely a gesture, if it was a symbol, it was a, hey, look how much I love you kind of a gesture, then it obviously wasn't necessary. Then the blood sacrifice wasn't necessary. And again, then it sounds like God is a very bloodthirsty, the God of the Bible, I should say, is kind of a bloodthirsty person. And then also on the courtroom issue, of course, if we're going to extrapolate from a courtroom setting, of course, the judge has a lot of discretion in what kind of sentences he can provide and who can happen. He can award punishment. He can grant leniency. But in the U.S. system, at least, you can even go all the way up to the president, and the president can pardon people. And that doesn't require that any payment be made to anyone. In the court system, it's already set up that there can be an ultimate person that can pardon without cost. And so again, it seems like our limitation to the Bible, the God of the Bible, if if humans can set up these systems where forgiveness can be free, then why doesn't the Christian God have similar abilities?
Because of perfect justice. The Christian idea in at least as far as like being a perfect God is going to he's going to have to also, God in his issuing of this judgment will have to be he can't just offer a forgiveness wholesale, because then he violates the justice side of it. And again, this is more of the Christian theology aspect about construction of God, that in order for him to do that, he has to, in order to remain perfect, there has to be a payment for the punishment.
Can I piggyback on that?
Go for it, SJ.
So just to point out, so you're pointing out the fact that, and that actually is a good point, we have an all-just God. So an all-just God would have to punish sins, and an all loving and merciful God would have to forgive sins. So you can see there's a dichotomy there, and it can't be possible to have both. So you would have to have the sins are actually taken away. And so Jesus served the purpose of taking the sins away. We were bound to our sins, and we can look at both ransom theory and substitution theory as both are supported in the Bible. But basically, we were humans, and humanity was bound to our sins, and the only way to free ourselves from that was for a Passover lamb, and that basically is Jesus.
Okay, let's jump to a theist again. Paul, did you want to come back on that?
No, I mean, I used to believe what they believe, so they're giving the same answers I actually give.
Right, sure.
Does anyone else want to jump in?
I have a couple of more so questions. So I'm still confused by why the sacrifice, the human sacrifice of Jesus, why he had to be instantiated in human form and sacrificed in order to meet God's need for justice. I understand the dichotomy that SJ put forward, but that dichotomy doesn't require a human sacrifice. Was there no other way?
It's more ultimate sacrifice, I think.
Well,
than just
let me
human.
just say one thing about that is there could have been another way. So I would say, I mean, this is just my answer, but I would say that God could have chose any way. So yes, I would say there could have been another way, but this is the way that he chose, and this is the way that he saw is the best way that works for all people. And so, yeah, I would say there could have been another way, but there wasn't. This is how it is, and this is what he did.
Well, yeah, because he's God. Could he not have simply just, made it known to everybody by decree that I've chosen to forgive you sins based on your worship of me? Like, could he not have done that? Why did it require that he take human form? And then also he would have had to take human form. There's so many moving parts that are required. He would have had to take human form and then set a course of actions in motion that required other humans to fulfill that prophecy for him. So, Pontius Pilate would have had to fulfilled that destiny. So he could not have made another choice. So then the question of free will comes into account, because all of the other humans involved in Jesus's crucifixion would have had to have followed the path that was set out by God in order to make that actualized. It could not have been actualized had those other humans not acted in any other way. So did he make them act that way?
Let's hear from Craig real quick on that.
Okay, as quickly as possible, because she went to a really interesting area, Shannon did. But the first part of the question was why Jesus on the cross? Why doesn't it just say everyone free? Right. That answer is actually mysterious. I came up with that. That hasn't been worked out theologically. My version of the answer is that God wanted to act in the real world. The moral actions have moral consequences in the real world. Everybody understands the theology of the cross. Whether you see it as perfect justice meets perfect mercy, that's how I see it. But everybody understands the theology. Even Apologetics said, I was a Christian too. I said exactly what they say. Why did he do it that way? Because he wanted to act in the real world. And what Shannon started talking about, it's not that there was no free will involved. It's that the world itself condemned itself. by its own actions of its own volition. In other words, Pontius Pilate sentenced an innocent man to death. That happened in real time. That really happened.
But if he had made a different choice, then Jesus never would have been crucified. So was that really his choice?
Exactly.
Yes. If that was God's predetermined will, was that really his choice?
It wasn't God's predetermined will. It was God's foreknowledge. There's a big difference. But go ahead.
Well, if I can add something.
Sure.
Okay. Well, in my view, human blood magic is much stronger than animal blood magic. In the Judaic way of atoning for sins and whatnot, you had different animal sacrifices. Like in our Bible reading, we just got to the part where if somebody gets killed and you don't know who the murderer is, then the blame is on the entire nation of Israel. So what you had to do was get a cow, go down by the river, break its neck, and wash your hands over the broken neck cow, and then do some other kinky stuff with the cow's corpse. So my point is, though, is that human sacrifice, like human blood magic, is going to be more powerful than animal blood magic, since they use blood magic in order to wash away the sins of Israel beforehand. They had to have some kind of human sacrifice to take that place and do away with it forever. So, I mean, human blood magic is going to be more powerful than animal blood magic, and that's how I would explain the need for a Messiah. Not to mention the fact that also in the Old Testament, the Septuagint, Torah, and whatnot, you have this Messiah figure that people were interpreting to be coming to be a savior of some kind. So, I mean, they were kind of primed and prepped for somebody to come to make a sacrifice for them.
Tim, you look like you wanted to say something.
I like that terminology, even at least for its creativity. We've also got to concede here that this is not just human blood magic. If we're using that term in that,
I think he just wanted to say blood magic.
We're using God. We're using God's blood.
Beetlejuice.
Jesus never ceased being God himself. Jesus never ceased being the divinity which is God, and so that's an amplification there. That in order to make way for an infinite amount of sin on the substitution theory, all the sins of all the people who've ever lived, you needed a payment that was also infinite. And the only infinite payment possible is the life of God himself in some real substantive way. So if you're going to use that term, you have to think also this isn't just merely a human. This is a human who also is at the same time God.
Well, yeah, but he didn't make a payment. It's basically like I gave you $5 and then I turned around and I got it right back. I mean, there's no payment there. I mean, he lived for an eternity beforehand, and then he inconvenienced himself for like 30 years, and now he's still alive up there afterwards. So there's no real, loss here. There's no real sacrifice. There's no real suffering. I mean, he suffered for 24 hours, and then he was raised from the dead. And this is a being that's supposed to be eternal. Like, what if you were to put that to a ratio? You're effectively got a zero, as far as how much suffering he actually went through. If you went by the amount of time that he suffered or whatever he did, I mean, the time that he is been existing is so large that it makes that time of suffering effectively nil.
It might not be a whole lot, but it might be also sufficient. And I think that some of the terminology you're using is a little strange, because it seems like from the argument that you're using that if somebody pays back a loan, then they never borrowed money. Or if they got paid back from a loan, then they never loaned money. And that doesn't make sense to me. I think that the sacrifice of Jesus, it works as a sacrifice. It's God coming into this world and then being sacrificed. The sacrifice is clearly happening. The pain is clearly happening. The suffering is clearly happening. It's not a final sacrifice for him, but he is going through the experience.
Right. I agree.
It still doesn't make it necessary, though.
Right. The argument of necessity is something else, but that's when you start appealing to
that's the
Old
real
Testament
question
lineage.
That's what the real question got to. We got off on some interesting side tangents. Why was that specific type of sacrifice necessary.
Well, let me just add one thing to that. And I guess I would say that when somebody offers to die in your place so you don't have to die, whether it be in war or whatever, I mean, that really is the ultimate act of love. And somebody else brought this up earlier. And so, I agree. I mean, that is the ultimate act of, he willingly died for us.
It may be the ultimate act of love, but it is not the ultimate act of justice. And if God is supposed to be both, like if someone, was to hurt someone in my family and someone else got to serve their sentence, I would not feel like justice was done.
Right, that's true. But you don't necessarily want justice to be done. You want a merciful God, not a just God.
Because no, but the argument was that it's ultimate justice, though. That was the argument.
Okay, but it's ultimate justice expressed. See, one of the
expressed
problems
in a way
here,
that's merciful.
Expressed in a way
then you have a counter
mercy.
argument saying he did suffer, so it's not merciful.
2 minutes, guys, on this question left. By the way, 2 minutes.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to add something that is the idea of sin. And again, the only way sin cannot get rid of sin. So no other human, nobody else could have possibly done what Jesus did. Jesus is the only one who was without sin. And so he was the perfect Passover lamb, essentially.
Yeah, a lot of the justifications for
the murder that happened.
A lot of the justifications for it are related back to Old Testament setup. So if you're asking why we have a blood sacrifice in the case of Jesus, then the justification is going to be rooted back into the Old Testament, in which sacrifices are penance.
But the initial question was why blood sacrifice?
Right, why blood sacrifice in general in the Old Testament,
and that's not really being addressed. I don't feel.
Right. That's and I agree that there needs to be some. I don't know what justification there is on the blood sacrifice itself in general, as far as when it comes to temple penance. That might be a question for a rabbi, but if any Christian wants to.
Well, the Old Testament is part of Christian canon as well.
Yeah, but I think that a rabbi would have more familiarity with it because Christians are usually focused on Jesus as well. Go ahead, Craig.
I was just going to say the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross was meant to satisfy something deep inside of God in his nature. It wasn't meant to satisfy something intellectually in us. It was for God. It was God's sacrifice that he had ordained, preordained. And it was to satisfy his own requirements of justice and mercy. That's how you got to look at it.
Okay, so let me get this straight.
He can let everybody go free. And he can give you mercy while satisfying his justice.
Okay, let me get this straight real quick. So God sacrificed himself to himself in order to please himself for stuff he did himself.
Yes.
Well, out of his love for us. You have to add that.
But
Don't forget about
fault.
And we're going to have to stop. So
relates to the fall of man in Garden of Eden.
I think what would be cool if you guys are in the chat want to, if you think the question was answered, press 1. If you don't, press 2. We'll go back and tally those up. That's how we'll keep track. So based on the answers. Yeah. And by the way, I want to say this to our other producer out there, Frankie. Happy birthday, man.
Happy birthday, Frankie. Yeah. And as a quick summation of this, let me add on here. If God's a maximally great being, then how he did this would follow this would be the only way he could have done it, because this is the best course of action that a perfect God would have done. So I don't think it follows that he could have done it any other way. So in regards to Shannon's question, why is the best possible way a blood sacrifice? And that's what the question, was it answered or not?
Okay. And now let's go into question number 2 from Luciano Gonzalez.
Cheers. A variety of religions, from ancient Greek beliefs to Native American beliefs, both past and current, account for gods that have relationships with their believers and with their servants. Why do you feel like the relationship that you claim to have with Jesus Christ is somehow special or unique and somehow invalidates how all other believers feel about their gods and their connections with their gods?
Hello, everyone.
Okay, let's start with SJ on this one.
Well, that's actually a good question. when we look at different faiths and different sets of beliefs, I don't feel that all other beliefs have said that it's a personal God. In fact, there's if you look at, for example, the Muslim beliefs, Muslims believe that God is transcendent, more aloof. If you look at Christians' beliefs, we believe that God is personal. He's both transcendent and immanent, meaning that he's in our world and he's outside of our world. So it's best explained with things like cosmology. But we also believe in Jesus Christ. And so the way that you can distinguish Christianity from many other faiths is we're the only faith in which God himself came to this world to exemplify for us exactly how he wants us to live our lives. And then other things just to point out, the Bible has 40 authors written over written over 1,500 years by many people who were martyred for their beliefs. So we weren't a faith that was born out of anything but peace. So we're unlike a lot of other faiths that way. And to speak specifically to Indian religions, I guess I'll pass that on to one of my colleagues here.
Yeah, I'll speak to the Hindu religion just a little bit. From what I know, the Hindus think that creation is God. I mean, some of them might disagree because in Hinduism believes, they're polytheistic. So they believe in many, many gods. So, but if creation is God, then how can God create creation? And so it has to be one or the other. It can't be both. And so from the studies that I've done, I know that creation was made by God. And so that's why when I take a look at, Hinduism, I just cannot agree with the fact that creation, or the universe is God. So that's what I would say about Hinduism. One main reason why I'm not Muslim, and, I let me just say, I love people of all faiths, people of, whether you have a belief or not a belief. But one reason why I'm not a Muslim is because Muhammad doesn't know the way to eternal life. And so, when you find out that Jesus does know the way to eternal life and he is the way to eternal life, that is the one main difference. And so the New Testament has Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that give an account of Jesus's life. And in the Quran, Jesus is mentioned, but he's just briefly mentioned, just a few little things. And so if you want to get a closer look at prophecy that was told about the Messiah to come and the virgin birth and the whole entire life, ministry, the Sermon on the Mount and all of that, you really need to read. We're just left with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I mean, that's really what we have to work with. And then we find out, of course, about his death that we just spoke about, his resurrection, his ascension, the pouring out of the Holy Spirit, and then he's coming back. And so, the Quran just doesn't have all of that. Now, for Buddhists, I'm not really that familiar with their what they believe, but from what I understand, they're mainly atheist or agnostic. And then I think there's Zen Buddhism, which I think they do. It's kind of like pantheism. They do believe that creation is God, or I might be wrong about that. I'm not. Maybe somebody else can actually speak on that. But
Ocean should be an expert in polytheism.
Okay.
This is a little interesting. I think that I'm speaking as somebody who is one of those other religions that, sometimes I have this question about Christianity, but I do have some other close friends that are Christian, and I've talked to them kind of about this subject. And the answer that I usually get in a more charitable conversations is that their spiritual experiences with a specific is a specific experience, a specific entity that they hold to. Now, whether or not that then equates directly to, that their God is the only God, that's a different question. But I think that the reason why they believe that relationship is special is because that's the relationship they have. And I can understand it from that perspective.
Okay, let's stop right there. Hold on 1 second. Craig, let Luciano jump in, and then you can jump after he has a chance to respond to what he just heard.
Sure.
All right, Luciano.
My question was actually addressed to a specific kind of Christian, and I don't know how many people in this conversation are that kind of Christian. And it's an argument that I've heard a lot of amateur apologists make to try and distinguish their religion from other religions. If you think that other people's experiences are valid, and if you think that they're legitimate, and if you think that at the very least some other believers have what they feel as personal relationships with their deities, then it doesn't really apply to you. And I don't know how many of you all feel that your relationship is unique or not. I wasn't making any assumptions about you.
Okay. Craig?
The only thing I was going to say is it's the reason why I'm a Christian as opposed to a Hindu is like, had I gone to a Hindu temple and Shiva appeared to me and been like, guess what? I'm real. I'm really Shiva. I would probably be a Hindu. Had I gone to a mosque and, you know, Allah appeared to me and personally and said, I'm Allah, follow me. I mean, yeah, I would have been like, wow, okay. I didn't think it was right either, but here he is right in front of me. That's effectively what happened to me when I went to church. God, in the form of the Holy Spirit, God made himself real to me completely and utterly, unmistakably through the Holy Spirit. Real.
Okay.
Now, I'm not expecting you to necessarily believe that, but that is my experience, and that is why I'm a Christian. Now, I haven't talked to like, just let me finish this. I haven't talked to like, you know, a really sold out Muslim. I'd be curious. I'd be curious if I felt his experience was legit. You know, I'd have questions for him, probably similar to atheist questions. Because you got any evidence for that? But that's to me the answer for me. So go ahead.
Okay. I feel like people are missing the actual question here, because the actual question is, you know, if other people have these experiences which compel them to believe in their particular faith, regardless of Hindu or Muslim, like they have these experiences just like you, Craig, had your experience. What indicates to you that they are falsely believing in this and you have the true faith? I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't talked to them.
Okay, let me just give it one more try here for, you know, to address an experience. I hear what you're saying, and it's a really good question. You know, if somebody came to me and said that, you know, the god of Jupiter or, you know, whatever, okay, some whatever god, okay, they had some experience with the god of Jupiter and wow, it was really, you know, real and stuff. You know, who am I to really tell them that, you know, what happened to them is not real? Now, that was their experience. However, we have to remember there's something called absolute truth. And so even if he had some experience that he thought was really real with the god of Jupiter, I would just say, but I'm not going to ignore all the rest of the truth that exists, you know, for us to really consider. You know what I mean? And so I'm not going to condemn this other person for having, you know, I mean, I know somebody who says they had a real experience with aliens, and then now they're questioning it, and now they're thinking, well, maybe it really wasn't real. And now he's just kind of confused because he doesn't really know, I don't think, you know. And so, but what I just want to be sensitive to what other people are going through. And so I am not going to say, you know, that what happened to you doesn't matter, that it wasn't real. I would not say any of that. But what I would say is, like I said before, I guess I would say we can't ignore, you know, historical documents. I don't want to ignore the holy books and make a decision, you know, about them. See what I mean? So I don't want to ignore the truth that really does exist out there, just based on somebody else's experience.
Okay. Maybe you should go to Ocean.
Does that help?
Since he is, since Ocean is kind of in this scenario with the theists, he is having a different experience outside of what you guys are. So it might be interesting to hear how that kind of lines up.
Yeah, totally.
If I did give an answer, it'd be switching sides essentially, because like this question is specifically about. I think he mentions Greek polytheism in his question, and I'm Norse polytheism, which is like next door to that. So the argument that I give, as far as what you said, Heather, just to kind of like poke at it a little bit, is you have multiple people that across the world getting all kinds of different experiences, and when you're talking about ignoring historical texts and so on, all these religions also have historical texts. So my perspective is going to be they all kind of have equal value. And if there is a spirituality that we're exploring, then it's equally possible to be any of these things that have been discussed. Now, the question is going to be which one's more coherent, what kind of arguments can we make for them, and Christianity, polytheism, and Islam and Judaism all make arguments saying that about why the religion is more coherent or better for whatever reason. As far as the pagan is concerned, or the polytheist, we have multiple kinds of experiences, but we consider to be multiple entities. So for us, monotheism just seems strange if you're looking at it from a spiritual perspective. We're convinced of the spirituality, we're convinced of the supernatural aspect, because we have experiences that are similar to Christians, but they're more multifarious. So when people try to tell us there's one God, it's kind of confusing to us.
Maybe Ocean, maybe you could tell us what was your experience? I mean, what have you had an experience where you feel like you've?
There's I generally don't go into it, but there's while I was traveling in Ireland, there's some I went to some old sacred sites that had a kind of an overwhelming feeling of presence in multiple areas that are like that, and from there it was like. A lot of like polytheists have this kind of experience where they feel like the gods are calling to them, and that was something where I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. Maybe I'll explore this.
How do you know it was a heartburn, by the way?
Maybe heartburn is very. I've had heartburn. It's
but how did you know? Let me ask you this. How did you know that those experiences that you were having in Ireland were necessarily from Odin or another god? Because we have people like St. Patrick who traveled to Ireland and delivered the message using clovers. He basically looked at the Trinity, and there was Ireland is a very Christian nation. So how did you choose to worship Odin?
If you want to look at St. Patrick's conversion methods, maybe it would be a little bit of a you would have some answers as to why Ireland is mainly
welcome
Christian.
to Team Marvel, Ocean. Welcome.
A little bit of violence there.
Welcome to Team Marvel.
Real quick, Craig, what denomination are you?
Batman.
If I can ask, because you said God manifested you. Can I ask what denomination that led you to? Because I don't think I.
You're talking about me? You're talking about?
No, Craig. Because Craig had Craig felt presence of God too. What denomination did he lead to?
It's hard for me to actually specify. I kind of am a non-denominational Christian. Most of the way that I learned Christianity was through, there are specific people out there, but kind of standard issue non-denominational Christian, but I'm really different from them in a lot of ways. So I don't know if that answer is satisfying at all, but that's the best answer I can get.
And just let people know,
I'm kind of one of them.
Okay.
But
I
there's
put
a
the
lot
link
of
to
things
the
that
description. I'm sorry. Finish.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's a lot of things that they're incorrect about.
Okay.
Hence the problems.
People were asking for the questions, so I put them in the video description. The link to SJ's blog for the questions, if people are interested.
Before we also drop off of this question, as far as SJ, I want to also point out that the experiences that I talked about in Ireland are not the only experiences that I've had. There's been experiences since then. I'm also associated with a religious group where, these things are fairly normal. So, I understand what you're kind of saying as far as like, if you look at the same experiences from a different perspective, could you interpret them in a way that is Christian? Sure. But as a polytheist, I can look at it and say, well, Christians, sure, you guys are having an experience with something. I wouldn't necessarily deny that Christians, when they pray, are feeling something that is possibly their God, or that their God had action or whatever. And I say possibly because I'm provisionally a theist. So now with that, if Christianity can still have like valid experiences and polytheism still be correct, if that makes sense to you. Do you understand that?
if there's a wisdom tradition in the polytheism, possibly.
Odin is the god of wisdom. What wisdom tradition are you talking about?
Well, I'm not 100% sure what you mean, but the only thing that pops into my mind is before I became a Christian, I read the Tao Te Ching a lot, and even when I look at it now, I see things in the Tao Te Ching that are quote unquote kind of spiritually true or wise or universal truths, ecumenical truths, whatever. I don't see any good reason why a polytheist couldn't be able to access some of that.
Hold on one second, guys. Let me stop you right here. We've got 2 minutes left.
Sure.
Ocean,
I can get in at some point, but
I'll give a quick response and then we can jump on.
Tim, we're going to get to you on the next question. I want to get to Ocean, let Ocean finish his thought, and then Luciano, I'm going to let you wrap up your question with a thought. Okay.
You could, if you wanted to, you could go to the Havamal, which is the words of Odin. That's the kind of a wisdom tradition in heathenry. Heathenry, as far as a lot of heathenry, is the Germanic polytheism that I follow. So that it might be the wisdom tradition that you're looking for. I also like the Tao Te Ching. There's no problem with being a polytheist and also referencing the Tao Te Ching or any other wisdom tradition that you wanted to look at. Like I'm fond of the Bhagavad Gita. I'm a fan of the Tao Te Ching and the Hua Ching as well.
Okay, Luciano.
So I was interested in hearing a variety of perspectives on this question. I didn't get that, but it does kind of strike me as odd that a whole bunch of people insisted on answering Lloyd Cedars' question, which is literally, what are your reasons for not being any other non-Christian faith? These two questions are not the same. They sound similar, but they're asking very different things.
What's the distinction between our answers and the question you were asking, do you think?
So I think that there were attempts to answer, and I think that people were on the right track. But I think that one of the issues I had is that people got kind of sidetracked by talking about like the fact that not all religions have personal gods, which is not my question. I pointed out, or I meant to say that not every single religion has a personal god, but multiple religions do, even if what they provide their followers is different from what Christianity supposedly provides its followers.
And we're going to have to stop it right there. That's the 18 minutes. Once again, if you think that the question was answered, press 1. If you don't think the question was answered, press 2. We'll tie this up later. All right, now we're going to move on to Brilliant Doubts question.
Why is it that the believers in every religion in history were wrong about their respective religion, despite having the same amount of conviction and evidence as you do for Christianity? It seems to me that you're already an atheist when it comes to all other religions in history, but somehow the one you happen to be born into is the one correct one.
Okay, Tim?
I'm going to get in trouble again.
So I guess my big thing on this question is it more correct than anything else I've ever run into, I've ever studied, I've ever practiced, I've ever tried to investigate? That's the only tack at this question I can take. I can't speak for an ancient Greek devout believer, or for a Zoroastrian at the time of Zoroaster, or for the early followers of the traditionalist religions in ancient China. I can't speak for those people and for what their experience with the world was to be able to make a determination of whether my faith then is the closest thing that they could get to God and to spirituality. And we've also got to take into account that, truth is objective and it's one thing, I think, that if you have an absolute truth. But I have to believe that being a limited being, I'm never going to get that complete, absolute, perfect truth, no matter how much I try. And so my answer both to the previous question and to this one is, broadly speaking, I'm making a claim about what I can investigate. I'm making a claim about what my experience is. I'm making a claim about the holy text and the specific interpretations of those texts that get me as close as I have been able to get to this divine thing that I call God. And I think that it's a better alternative, certainly, than any other I've run into, but you provide me with a better alternative and I'll jump to it. And I also know that I'm in a specific context of history. I'm a specific person, a specific place, in a specific culture, a specific time, and that if there are multiple different ways of getting to the same God, which is a possibility at the very least, then I've got to admit that in a different place, a different time, a different culture, something else would have gotten a different person who's totally different as close as they could get.
Okay. Anybody else want to pick up on that before we go over to Dylan?
I'll pick up on it from the Christian perspective. So if we look at cosmology and we actually take a look at the Big Bang, and we can say that scientists have determined that the time, space, and matter began about 13.8 billion years ago with a Big Bang where inflation was powered. We have to look at what was in existence prior to that, and we could say that whatever it was had to be timeless, had to be eternal, and had to be immaterial and omnipotent. And so we take a look at the gods, and we take a look at different beliefs around the world, and we can say that if we look at Taoism or Jainism or Buddhism, we find that they actually all think that the world is eternal. So that would not be consistent with the Big Bang. If we take a look at Hinduism, there's one verse in Hinduism that implies that we could be part of a multiverse. And so that actually would be somewhat consistent. And then we look at Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and those faiths all do endorse something consistent with the Big Bang. So we're already limiting it down to that. Now, if we just look at the type of God that you see in the Muslim Lord, the Muslim God, the Muslim Allah, basically he is an aloof God. He's a transcendent God, but he's not interacting personally with people, and it indicates in the Quran in no place that he is love. So if your experience with the Lord, and in my experience with the Lord is that God is love, and he has a very loving personal relationship, that brings me down to Christianity. And even looking back at our whole idea with justice and mercy, that eliminates Judaism, because Judaism didn't have Jesus, basically, and Jesus was the one who solved the whole issue with perfect justice and perfect mercy.
What about, I noticed that you didn't mention paganism in your...
That's actually great.
Notably absent in that response.
I didn't, as far as paganism, I'm not sure exactly what pagans think about the universe, actually. It'd be great if Ocean wants to pick up on
well,
that.
let's go to Dylan real quick first to see how he wants to respond to the first of you, and then we'll jump to our token pagan.
Thank you for responding to my question, first of all. Appreciate it. So this question kind of does go hand in hand with Luciano's question, but it is a little bit different. The question is posed with a couple assumptions. So I'm assuming that your criteria for the absolute truth, if you will, for your particular religion is either your conviction or someone's personal conviction or personal experience that was moving such that this is the one religion, or if your criteria is the presence of a religious text or the presence of some sort of history. If those are if that is your criteria, many of the religions in history have met this criteria. Very much the same way that either of you would subscribe to. So when you say that you go towards what you can investigate, for example, what you determine what you can conclude, or where you're talking about how the Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago, and it must have been a timeless and eternal and omnipotent God. These are the criteria has still been met by these other religions, and I don't understand what sets yours apart from these ones.
Timeless and omnipotent God is rare. That's something that's pretty unique to Christianity.
Yeah, you can't say, like Taoism, for example, they don't consider the gods, they consider that there's an ultimate force, and then there's gods that are actually not omnipotent. So that's one example.
Taoism basically sees the universe as an organism. Hinduism sees the universe as kind of a dramatic play. Christianity sees the universe as something that has been created. And while other religions might see it as something that's been created, the Christians make a logical argument about what is the necessary attributes of the God need to be in order to be a creator. And they ascribe omnipotence as one of them, and that's the exception between Christianity and a lot of the other religions. You know, your Abrahamics all have the omnipotent God.
Yeah, go ahead.
But pagans do not, Hindus do not. I mean, Brahman might be considered omnipresent, but it's a universe that arguably doesn't exist, depending on the Hinduism you're looking at. So, you know, when you're talking about that omnipotent, all-powerful God, the Abrahamic tradition is unique in that claim.
Okay, so let me just add something to that, and that is I would like to clarify the word theism, because a theist, technically speaking, is anybody who is a Muslim, a Christian, or a Jew. And so polytheism really is separate. It's not really included in theism, because with polytheism, you have many gods, and in theism, you have just one God, that one high supreme being who we call God. And, you know, I'll just add that I'm a student working on getting my master's at Southern Evangelical Seminary. And we have just gone through 16 different ways to know that the theistic God does exist. And Stephanie brought up a couple of examples. And I'm not going to sit here and just, you know, tell you all 16 of them. I mean, I have studied these things. And so if you're interested in getting to know if the theistic God really does exist, you know, maybe start with Aquinas's 5 ways. I'm sure you've heard of the first mover, the first cause, God is pure existence, you know, and these are things from the 13th century, and I know some people think that they've been debunked, but when I take a look at anybody who claims they've debunked it, they really have not debunked it. And, you know, that's only 5. You know, 5 more ways to know that the theistic God exists are the classical ways. SJ brought up the cosmological reasoning. You know, you have your moral law, you have the ontological reasoning, the teleological reasoning, you have your one actual infinite. I love that one. There can only be one actual infinite. There's no such thing as 2 greatest. There can only be one actual infinite that is the greatest.
Like Highlander.
And then go ahead. I don't want to keep going on, but
like Kyle.
Okay. Hold on. I know that Ocean's dying to get in here.
I'm chomping at the bit. Yeah.
I'm going to let you speak.
And I know exactly what Ocean's going to say.
I think all of us.
Dylan wants to respond to that first, and then we'll go to Ocean's response. But let's see if Dylan wants to speak to what Heather just said, and then I'll let
It'll
you
be really quick if you want to do that, and then go to Dylan.
I'm gonna default to Dylan, whichever.
No, it's okay. You can go first. It's okay.
Sure. I should say I know what you're going to say, so say
yeah,
it.
As far as the main quibble that I've got with what you said is the rest of about, because I think that if you have like all these arguments for the monotheistic God, then fine. Somebody can be convinced by all of these arguments together, and that can be a better argument than any one of them alone. And I respect that position. However, as far as polytheism versus theism, there is a word monotheism that tends to be used as far as there being one God. It's monotheism, one theos. Polytheism would be many theos. Theism is just theos. So the polytheist is a theist. That's the reason why we use the word. That's why theist is at the end of it. As far as classical theism in a philosophy sense, classical theism tends to be regarding the monotheistic philosopher's God, which is still distinct from what Christians believe, because the philosopher's God has some requirements that aren't necessarily scriptural. So there can be disagreements between Christians and classical theists. But as to say that polytheists aren't theists is the second time that I've heard that, and both of them been from Christians, and it is a very strange claim to me. Go ahead, Dylan.
You have a vein, Ocean, popping out the side of your head. You need to relax.
It's important clarification because Heather's coming from a classical theist perspective.
Yeah. No,
other people are. So she's on a different page than everybody else. Nobody's saying what she's saying is wrong from her perspective. It's not from her perspective.
Polytheists are not classical theists. We aren't.
Yeah. Right.
We don't believe the same things as classical theists. But from a philosophy perspective, polytheism falls under theism.
That I agree with.
Okay. And now let's go to Dylan.
Dylan.
So I'm trying to understand. So just to confirm, so what I'm gathering is because Christianity makes an assumption that there's an omnipotent God and there is a Big Bang, therefore it is Christianity. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I'm trying to understand that so that I can respond in such a way that I understand your counter-argument.
Yeah, if I can try to tackle that, or
Sure.
actually Kantouche.
Was that question directly to Heather, or was that? I don't want her to get.
To whoever.
My approach to this, to get as confident as I am, which probably isn't as confident as SJ or Heather is to look at each of the major options that we have regarding how gods interact with the world, or if is there not a god, or gods. Okay, atheism. That purely materialistic approach to the universe doesn't answer some of my fundamental questions about the universe. It doesn't allow for certain things that I think are necessary based upon my experience. Pantheism and various forms of polytheism address some of those concerns, but not others. And so, and then like a pure deist, aloof, 18th century philosopher or a average Muslim has a God that fulfills different sorts of questions about how the world works and why it's the way it is. Christianity, to me, provides, in the fact that it has this omnibenevolent, omniscient, omnipresent God. That's the one formulation that answers all of my questions, or at least attempts to. It's the only formulation that's ever head-on attacked all my moral and epistemological and teleological and materialistic questions about how the universe came to be and how I came to be who I am and what I do. And so my point is simply that no other answer has been as sufficient. And this relationship and this type of faith has that very specific quality of at least attempting to answer all of the questions I have.
Okay, Dylan?
So I kind of want to reframe the question a little bit, because I think we're going off on sort of a tangent. I just similar to Luciano's question, I think we're kind of on the right track, but again, this might be a misunderstanding on my end. So as far as I can see, there's nothing directly linking this creation to your particular religious convictions. So if the criteria that you're looking for is your experience, that these are the things that you experienced to answer the questions that you're asking, or when you're talking about that Christianity makes this very exclusive and unique position of omnibenevolent and omnipotent and whatnot. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in all previous religions, so I can't really talk to which ones necessarily might share and not share those particular attributes. But it still seems to me that we're still going really hard on your experience, your conviction, and the sayings of text, the sayings of whatever is going on in the religion. And I don't understand how what links this exclusively to Christianity, because just because it says that we have an exclusive view that there's an omnipotent God, therefore Christianity. I think this is the part where I may not be understanding. I might want to tackle this for a second, because I think that if you the Christians hold this fairly unique idea of God that they argue for through mainly the cosmological argument and also the teleological argument. But if you want to get into like a whole comparative religion thing, as far as what other gods kind of hold this, there's only a couple of others that are similar, and none of them are really quite like it. There's Ahura Mazda from Zoroastrianism might be a candidate, but I don't think that Zoroastrians even hold Ahura Mazda as being the three omnis. If a Zoroastrian can correct me if I'm wrong, I know one. I should give her a call, but I don't think that that's the case with them. There's another religion that popped up in Egypt for a generation that was monotheistic, but I don't think that it had those attributes either.
2 minutes.
Even Judaism doesn't necessarily have those attributes either. So you wind up with Christianity and Islam, which is the originator of the Kalam cosmological argument. Then you can get into a comparative between those two. And if you want to have a Christian answer why they prefer Christianity over Islam, you're going to get a lot of different answers that aren't that I don't think are geared towards what your question is asking. Does that address what your question is?
I suppose so. It just seems if you had come upon a different religion, whether it be because you were born into it or you found another religion to be so convincing such that it presents itself to you as the one true religion, you would have the same type of argument and the same type of conviction. And I think what I'm getting down to is I don't see what makes Christianity different. We keep going back to the presence,
the properties of the God, which are made through a logical argument, and that's the logical arguments that are made that Heather made mention to, are the ones that Christians would start thinking like, look, these are the exceptions. This is how it works out. Now, you might be able to argue that Islam has a lot of those same things, but then there's a lot of other differences between the two as far as which one is the true Abrahamic tradition.
Yeah, let me just add that the one thing basically that sets Christianity apart, from Judaism and from Islam is the birth, life, death, resurrection, ascension, pouring out of the Holy Spirit, and the prophecy that Jesus Christ is going to return. I mean, that is what Christianity is built on. And so that is what separates it from the other two theistic religions. And I do have to point out that, Muslims, Christians, and Jews really do all believe that there is one true infinite God who is the greatest. And and I'm not telling you to buy into this, I'm asking you to find out like I found out. And, to try to address your question, what if you were born into a different religion? I'll just say this. Okay. If I grew up and my family taught that the one God is the God of Jupiter, I would want to find out for myself. And so I'm just saying, find out. You know what I mean? You don't have to just buy into God is the God of Jupiter. Go find out.
Okay. Last 30 seconds to Dylan, and then Steve, I'll let you wrap up the question.
Well, let me ask Dylan because it's to Dylan.
Okay. Go ahead.
Dylan, in your wrap up, was part of your question having to do anything with probabilities as far as what's the likelihood, since all these other religions have been failed or people that no longer believe them, what's the likelihood of somebody's individual religion being correct? Was there some kind of probabilistic in there at all?
Yeah, there was an assumption of that. Okay. Yes.
Okay, Dylan, do you want to do you have anything that you want to add to wrap up before we move on to the next question?
No, I think that I need to reformulate the question. I think that we got held up on a couple things that were not the intention of my question, but I appreciate everyone's input.
Okay. Once again, press 1 if the question was not answered, or if the question was answered, press 1. If the question was not answered, press 2. And now we're going to go over to Godless Engineer.
Often, creationists will characterize the Big Bang as something magically created from nothing. But then you have creationists who literally believe a supernatural being created the entire universe. Literally something magically from nothing. My question to you is why is the first one irrational but the second one logical?
Okay. Who wants to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I'll just start real quick. I don't want to take all the time up. So cut me off if I'm going too long. But this is a really good question. And, in my classes, we do learn the concept of ex nihilo. And so that is exactly what he's talking about, is how can this happen from nothing? Did it happen from nothing or not? And how does this from nothing really work? And I just have to point out that you need to add from nothing by something, or is it from nothing by nothing? Because if it's from nothing by nothing, then you just have nothing. But if you have it was created from nothing by something, then now at least you have something that created it. Now, the whole concept of ex nihilo, from nothing, I will agree with you that it is mysterious. Okay, so I'm giving you my answer here, that the way that you can take a look at it, I think there's two questions here that are very similar. How did God make humans ex nihilo, and how did God make creation ex nihilo? And so we're kind of talking about the same thing here. Obviously, they're two separate concepts, humans and creation, all of creation. But the question is, how did God make it from nothing? And so what I just want to point out is something is totally being missed, and that is the concept of elements are being changed. And that is the whole mysterious part. And so that's why we call it supernatural, because we didn't see it. We don't know exactly how he did it. He didn't give us the directions on how he did it, or we would do it, wouldn't we? Maybe that is the whole point, that we don't know how exactly God made a human being, because the whole point is perhaps he doesn't want us to go and make a human being. You know what I mean? And so I think some of it is hidden on purpose. But the terminology ex nihilo is mysterious. It is a very, I guess you would say, very Christian belief to say that God did make creation ex nihilo, from nothing. But again, it's from nothing by someone. It's not from nothing by no one.
Okay.
Okay.
John?
Okay, so in your point of view, Heather, does God make rain? Like, does God actually, like, every day that it rains, wherever on the earth, is that like a conscious effort of God?
I thought you said brain.
Okay, so you're
no,
so I
not
rain,
like precipitation. Does God make brain? I was like,
so you are so you're talking about literal precipitation?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'll just say I am not a scientist. I am not a biologist. I am not a meteorologist. Okay, so they could probably answer your question a whole lot better than I could. But I will say that there are natural things happening in the universe. We have lightning, you have rain, you pointed out, snow, stuff like that. And so there are natural processes that do take place. And from what I understand, I believe Christians will say that God is sustaining the world. So he has the full power control, at his disposal. And so if you want to say, does God make it rain? I would say in one way, yes, because he's sustaining the world, but it's a natural occurrence. And so, we all could look up precipitation and figure out how the cycle happens. This is kind of elementary, taking a look at the water cycle. We all learn, it rains, it evaporates, it circles back around. And so there is a natural process to it that is happening. So I would say it's not just a clear cut yes or no. I think it deserves, these are really good questions, by the way. And I'll just end with, they deserve very thorough answers. I'll put it that way.
Okay. So if there's a natural explanation for something that doesn't require a God to have it happen, then why do you make the logical leap to say that it requires a supernatural thing to kick it off? Like, what is, like, how do you know that that causation is needed? Like, a supernatural thing is needed to jumpstart the water cycle.
I think that she's talking about groundness of being. Is that right?
Yeah.
Heather?
So let me try to get a little bit better understanding of your question, because if you're talking about the very first cause, okay, that's a little bit different than your intermediate causes, because, who caused me? My mom and dad, caused me to come into this world. And so, one person can say, well, it's not God who caused you to come into the world. It's your mom and dad who caused you. Well, yeah, I agree. It's your mom and dad who caused you, but if you go back historically, you're going to get to that first cause. And, that's actually one of the ways to know that the theistic God does exist, is to look back historically to say there has to be that first efficient cause. There has to be that first one and he has to be eternal, because how could the chain continue forever? So if you take a look at finite things have a beginning, correct? If you take a look at physical finite things, they have a beginning. And so things that have a beginning have a cause. That's just one of the laws of causality. So I guess it's a matter of getting to know the causality principle, that there has to be that first cause that causes the first Big Bang, that causes the first form of life. I'm not going to bring in evolution, but somehow life began. And so life comes from pre-existing life. And so, yeah, I guess I would just take a closer look at the whole causality principle.
Well, okay, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to step over you here, because the argument I hear you making, sir, is more of an Occam's razor argument, that God is not a necessary point, that we can get to a completely naturalistic explanation of how the universe came to be and how these things happened. So why do we need God? Occam's razor, we should cut it off. The explanation that makes the fewest leaps of faith is the best one, correct?
It's if it has some explanatory power. You have to include that for that.
Well, I mean, there's no logical connection between natural processes and a supernatural being. There's no evidence to support that there is a connection there.
Okay, well, let me just address real quick miracles, because there's no way that you're even going to believe in miracles unless you first believe that God exists, because he is the supernatural being. So he is the one who has the ability to perform miracles and to intervene in a supernatural way, like a virgin birth, like turning water to wine. I mean, these are changes of elements. And that, previously we talked about ex nihilo, but I am personally adding, in addition to ex nihilo, there is some kind of mystery of a change in elements that is happening supernaturally. But I really don't expect you to even buy into miracles unless you first really believe that the theistic God exists.
So you have to believe in a God before you can accept the evidence for God.
No, that's not what I said.
It kind of felt like it, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, even as a theist.
Can you clarify for him, Heather?
Well, to believe in miracles is I gave a couple of examples. Like, you tell me, do you believe that Jesus turned water to wine?
No.
No, that is not physically possible.
Right. It seems that way, doesn't it? And that's why we call it supernatural. Well, I agree that you cannot go and perform scientific, experiments with water and somehow end up with wine. And, I'm not a biologist, but when you have water, let's just consider for a minute, if it does change to wine, what would you call that?
A fairy tale.
No, if it really did, right? I'm talking about literally. Right now, literally, if it was right there.
I think Bella's engineer, she's asking that if you were standing before Jesus and he did that and you saw it happen and you can
you can't call it a fairy tale if you really saw it happen. So.
Okay, David Copperfield makes elephants disappear on a weekly basis, so I don't know why that would immediately convince me that a supernatural being exists. You have magicians. Hold on, you have magicians that work in illusory things. That they create these illusions. They create these things because it's a matter of perception. I don't know that exactly is what happened right there. You could have some instant wine or something that he hid up his sleeve.
Let me take your elephant, just real quick. Let me take your elephant example. So your elephant example, let me tell you that Well, why did he do that? If he's making elephants disappear, does he have any kind of a truth claim? Does he have any kind of a message? Is he claiming that he's a messenger from God? Does he have any kind of a divine message for anyone? And if he doesn't, then maybe you believe he can make elephants disappear, maybe you don't. But there's a huge difference in Jesus turning water to wine, because he performed that miracle for a reason, because he had the Sermon of the Mount. He had a message. He had a message because he was a messenger from God. And so I would agree with you that some people can deceive and perform illusions. I would totally agree with you on that. But I would say to that, let's take a closer look at that. What are they doing? Who are they? And what is their message?
I mean, David Copperfield could claim to be the son of God. It still wouldn't change the fact that he makes an elephant disappear.
So you don't care what he claims to be, or if he has any kind of an important message?
A guy on the side of the road can claim to be Jesus or the next Messiah or anything like that. That doesn't mean that his claim to the Messiahship is actually true. What I care about are the truth claims. Now, David Copperfield, he can claim whatever he wants to, but my point of fact here is that illusions exist. People can work illusions. So a quote unquote miracle of water to wine right in front of me would not be enough to convince me, because I know that people can do things like make cruise ships and elephants and all these great fantastical things disappear. I mean, they can perform these illusory acts and just using our own limited perception. So I'm just saying that no, any miracle that somebody could perform in front of me, I'm fairly certain that if we really looked into it, studied it, we would come up with a natural explanation for it, because at no point in time in the past has a supernatural explanation superseded a natural explanation.
But okay. I think, if I can real quick, I think you guys are on two different pages here. I think Heather's asking, ontologically, if it was the case he turned water into wine, what would you cause it? You're just assuming naturalism without a falsification criteria for it. She's assuming that it has been falsified. The laws of nature are suspended. What would you call that if that was the case? Is that correct, Heather?
Yeah, if it literally happened before your eyes, are you just going to deny it and go, that's not wine, and like drink it even though it tastes like wine? Or are you going to acknowledge, yeah, he really did turn water to wine, and then, what would you call that? I don't think you would call that a fairy tale. My point is there would have to be a change in elements. That is my point. You have H2O, you have water, and then all of a sudden you have wine. And so, you could call that ex nihilo. I would not call that ex nihilo, from nothing. I would call it a change in elements that happened that was not according to the natural law. And so that's why we call it supernatural.
I would call it magic and immediately subscribe to Merlin.
Let me jump on here on this one too.
Well, magic would be a suspension of natural law, would it not? I mean, I don't think his answer is unfair if that's the suspension of natural law is what magic is, right?
But magic is illusion.
Well, magic, yeah, is more about deception.
I'm talking about actual.
Let's go back. Let's go back and actually look at the most important claim, the entire claim upon which Christianity was founded, is the resurrection. That's something David Copperfield is not doing. I mean, a lot of these magicians today, they're illusory, sure, but they're not. And maybe they figured out a way to make it by illusion that they could turn water into wine or anything like that. But what we're claiming and what Christianity is claiming is that Jesus rose from the dead. And if that truly happened, you have to know that a God was involved. And to go past that, let's look at the very first early Christians and what they said. So we have James, who was Jesus' brother, who was very skeptical of Jesus. We have Paul, who was busy murdering Christians and endorsing the murders of Christians. And we have Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times. Now, all 3 of these people claim they saw the risen Jesus. They completely changed their lives. For decades, they preached, even though it was illegal. They ended up being stoned and imprisoned and bitten by snakes, and everything else happened to them, but they refused to recant their testimonies. This has been verified extra-biblically in 9 different sources within 150 years, secular sources, and another 33 Christian sources within 150 years. So we have these people who are making this claim, and you have to look at that and say, why would they do that?
Okay, so name those sources that confirm these things.
Extra biblically?
Yes.
Okay, so we have Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger.
Oh no!
Okay, that's going to be a whole different program right there.
If we go into this, I'm gonna.
I will unmute myself just to say no.
We can never get away from
the In Judea, Jesus was a great man.
It's just wrong.
2 minutes, guys.
Sorry, but no.
Go, Stephanie. Go, Stephanie.
Can I fill this up? I think it's
if I can finish who the sources are, and then you guys, we could do another thing. But we've also got Celsus, Marabar Serapion, Thales, Tony. Who is interrupting me? So Phlegon. I mean, that was the rule. No interrupting in the middle, right? You asked me a question, so I'm just finishing. Those are the extra biblical. Those are the secular sources, and we also have, of course, Christian sources. 33 Christian sources, including some in the Bible and some outside of the Bible.
Okay, John, explain why that doesn't count, John.
Okay, so all of the sources that you listed there, SJ, actually don't cement Jesus in history or say that he was crucified. At best, what you could say is that Tacitus records Christians being in Rome around 64 AD, I believe it was. Like, that's the best that you could do with that. And even then, Tacitus was getting his information from Pliny the Younger, to which Pliny the Younger, he would have gotten his information from Pliny the Elder, who was actually in Rome at the time, and he didn't mention Christians at all. So there's none of the sources, like Marabar Serapion, that he doesn't prove Jesus existed or even was crucified and died and whatever. None of those sources actually cement him in history.
That's not true. And actually, I've written down, I've written a blog, and I'll post this on here, but I've written a blog that identifies exactly the words that these people said. And the words do verify things that we can show that Jesus lived. He was a pious man. He made miracles. He did a lot of things that these extra biblical sources are saying.
Last word to John.
Well, I want to say something too.
Okay, well, after John, let John wrap it up.
This is one of my pet issues, so I might.
Hold on.
But
John,
okay.
Hold on, John. Do you want to go ahead and wrap it up?
Yeah, well, all I'll say is that natural explanations have always trumped supernatural explanations, and God is definitely a supernatural explanation. So until you can bridge that gap between natural explanations and supernatural explanations, you can't make that logical leap, and that's exactly what creationists do, or anybody that uses the whole first cause argument does, is they make a logical leap to God when there doesn't need to be a logical leap to God.
Okay, so what was the cause of the universe?
Guys, we got to move on to the next question. I know we gotta keep to the schedule. Okay, 1 if the question was answered, 2 if not. And Steve, go ahead and say what you need.
I just want to because the question really was about something from nothing originally, and I wanted to reiterate to people: if you think it is illogical for something to come from nothing, you really do need to demonstrate that with the reductio, and you need to actually prove that using logic, because as it stands, I don't think there's any logical argument that prevents something from nothing. It's counterintuitive. It goes against common sense, but to say it's illogical is a whole different ballgame, because you actually have to demonstrate that. Yeah, and also I would think that if you posit supernatural, you still need a falsification criteria of what would you expect if there is a if there is something supernatural. You can't just say by fiat everything we've seen is natural, therefore everything will be always natural. What would you expect if there is something supernatural?
You're singing my song, Steve.
We're now going to go on to Cyrus the Skeptic, and a very, very, very what I think is one of my favorite questions. So let's see how they respond to this.
So, in most sections of Christian theology, there's typically one of 2 afterlives you'll get into when you die. There might be different subsects of this, but generally speaking, there are these main 2 ones: heaven or hell. So my question would be, why would you want either of those? Let me lay it out. You can either go to heaven and have no free will, or you can go to hell and burn forever. Take your pick. If you go to heaven, everything's happy at all times, which means you're not allowed to feel sadness. You'll be worshiping God until the end of days, and there's going to be no end of days, so it's going to keep going forever and ever, which means you effectively have no will of your own. You are forced to worship this deity until who knows when. Now, if you go to hell, then you're going to be burning forever, but at least you have your free will. In neither of these are you given a choice or a chance to be anything but what you will be shaped and molded into. In both of these, you will effectively be a slave, whether you have your free will and you're burning and tortured, or you have no free will and thus are effectively stuck in unending servitude. I don't believe either of these places exist, and I have no reason to believe either of these places exist, but it seems that a lot of Christian theists want these places to exist. And my question would have to be, why? Both of them sound absolutely abysmal.
Okay, who wants to step up to sure. Go ahead.
Cyrus and I had a good conversation on this last night.
All right, we'll get to you. We'll get to you next, Ocean. Let's go ahead and let Tim take it, and then we'll send it over to Ocean.
This was my most developed response, I think, to the initial video, which is to say, not all Christians believe in this dichotomy. I, for one, don't. I don't believe that there's a hell. I don't. Period, point blank. That if there is a hell, sign me up with the devil's side immediately. Because any God who would do that is not worthy of my worship. One. Two, fire and brimstone in the biblical sense are very symbolic of destruction, of elimination, of the cessation of existence. In that cultural context, that's what Gehenna and Hades and hell are. They are, you no longer exist, or we don't know what happened to you, so we're going to assume that, you've ceased to be. And then you get into the points about free will on the heaven side. I think the question too narrowly scopes the statement about what worship is. I would say that I try to make it such that everything I do in my life is worship. There's nothing that I do when I'm at least trying to be my best self that is not something I would consider to be something that is directed, at least in part, to God as a Christian. That the work I do the work I do both because I want to make my boss happy and because to do less would be to be wasting God's time. So on and so forth through my personal life and whatnot. And so to say that heaven, under whatever conception of it we have, if it, I can't make any claims about how it works because I've not been there, but to say on the popular conception of heaven, if you grant that one, that's a negation of free will, is kind of a moot point to me, because I'm the kind of person that's already trying to be that person who's always putting my foot forward to do the best thing possible to glorify God. I'm the type of person that, I could go on and on and on about this, but the point is that if what I'm opting to do anyway, what I would opt to do in any case is the option that I have, and there's a diversity of ways of doing that, then I don't see where my free will gets infringed upon there.
Okay, Ocean, and then we're going to go over to Cyrus.
Cyrus wants to respond to that. Go ahead, and then I can Cyrus and I can kind of like reenact our conversation we had on Twitter.
That's cool.
Yeah, we'll just have to go through and read the script and go like, okay, what did we say?
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I just looked it up.
I read that conversation. It's decent.
So if or when I did my video response to this, I kind of tackled this because I did read the responses and did this, so maybe I'm cheating a little bit. But my thing is that I was trying to address the standard fundamentals, and fundamentally, when you look at when we're posing a question to all Christians, which I think is a bit of a problem, because there's hundreds of denominations, and trying to hit each one individually would take enough time to where it wouldn't be worth it, in my opinion. But when I'm trying to address a question of like all the fundamentals, the hell doctrine is part of those fundamentals. It's part of the reason why Jesus came down in a lot of different versions of Christian. I would argue in most versions of Christian theology. So I don't want to say that you're being dishonest, because I know you're not. Whenever
Tim, are you an eliminationist?
Am I an eliminationist?
Talking to Tim.
Am I?
Yeah.
To the extent I hold two different ideas. I don't know which one is better. I'm torn between eliminationism and universalism. The thought that those who are unworthy just don't exist anymore, and that
everybody goes
point
to
down
heaven.
the road, everybody goes to heaven. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And if you hold that point, I would say that that's something that I could, like, me and you could easily be friends on that, because I have no problem saying that. I have no problem with the idea of the dichotomy being heaven with a being you may or may not agree with, or annihilation, because as an atheist or a colloquial atheist,
For me, it would be annihilation, and if something else is there, then so be it. But for now, as far as I can tell, when I die, there's nothing there. The idea of the heaven and hell dichotomy is my problem, but if you don't have the issue of the heaven and hell dichotomy, then I don't think there's much of a conversation we can really have here. You simply have a different version of the faith, and on those semantics, I can't really address because the semantics kind of negate the question.
Ocean,
agreed.
So here's what I wrote on the Twitters, and I'll just read it straight up so that we can just act it out, Cyrus. I said, I think that a major issue that I have with this is the lack of understanding of heaven and hell. I think it's honestly impossible to sin in heaven, so we're not losing our free will in heaven. Noting what it is, we don't have bodies. So a lot of the major sins that are in Christianity depend on the existence of a body. So there's no lust without sex organs. There's no envy without possessions. There's no sloth without a body to be slothful with. There's no gluttony without the ability to eat. So you can't murder anyone in heaven. And I would conclude then that if free will exists in any conception, because I think that there's a lovely debate with Joe Sonseed about free will on this channel, that I would challenge you to say, like, what exactly are you being prevented from doing in heaven? Because it seems like all the sins are just impossible. I don't see a desire beyond repeating the history of Lucifer, which would be rooted in pride. But that would be difficult for the population of heaven because everybody chose to be there. Everybody that's there wants to be there with God. So the Lucifer situation of somebody thinking they're greater than God and turning away from it, that's not something that seems like it would happen in the heaven that Christians describe with how you get there in the first place.
Okay, and then I guess, in the state of reenacting, at that point, I would say that you'd have to define pretty much each and every individual act that can be considered sin, because there are some sins that would not necessarily fall under the category of carnal sins. I know the example I used on there was homosexuality, but obviously in that worldview, that would be a carnal sin. So maybe not the best example, but if there are any sins that would be of thought of any kind, like the argument that you chose to be there with God, so you taking the Lucifer path wouldn't necessarily be an option.
It's not that it's not an option. It just wouldn't make sense for anybody that's there.
Well, true, and it wouldn't make sense. But for instance, if once you managed to get to heaven, if the version of God that you found, like say you went through the doctrine and when you managed to get to heaven, you see this version of God. This is not the version of God that you actually thought that you subscribe to. There's something else here, which I know is a very human thing to say that happens a lot of times when we get into relationships or get into a new job. This isn't what I imagined.
This wasn't what I expected.
Yeah, this is the grasses aren't greener over here. Crap. But the because of issues like that, I would say that saying that I don't know why someone would want to change their mind once they're there. I could see a bunch of reasons why they would want to change their mind, because it happens all the time here. Obviously, the rules would be different in a celestial realm where you don't have a body and you don't have carnal desires and you don't have all these things. Right. Obviously, a lot of those semantics are taken out of the argument at that point. But I think the simple statement that why would they want to change their mind once they're there, I don't think that holds as much water.
And before you respond, Ocean, let's hold off because let's go to another theist real quick, because to be fair, you are Team Valhalla. So let's go to
okay, so let me just bring up
this
the question again.
This conversation is like a reason why I joined in, though.
Yeah, I know. Go ahead, Heather.
So the question was, then why do Christian theists want these places, heaven and hell, to exist? And so to directly answer that question, just very quickly, basically because Christians know that, they have come to know that there is such a place as an afterlife. And so these things are taught in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so, that's why. I mean, that's why they believe these places exist, because they, we Christian theists believe that the Old Testament and the New Testament documents are reliable, and so they're trustworthy. And, if other people don't believe in, Jesus turning water into wine or whatever, that's a choice that person's making, but it doesn't mean that the document is not reliable. And so I I have just done a very thorough investigation myself. I have got to the place where I wanted to find out for myself. So I'm not just believing it just because somebody else believes it, just because I'm hoping that's the way it is. I really wanted to find out for myself. I wanted to know if, the document really is trustworthy. And so that's why I believe there's such a place as heaven and hell, because the documents say that there is such a place as an afterlife. Now, if you want me to give you, details and descriptions on exactly what they're like, we only get small glimpses. And so we really don't get a fuller picture of it, but we can learn about it and we can know about it. Now, if you don't believe in the reliability of the Old Testament and the New Testament, then you might not think that there is such a thing as your body having a soul and your soul going on, after your body dies. I do believe that there is such a thing as called an afterlife. And I do believe that as a human being, we have a body and we also have a soul. And so either you do or you don't.
You sound like you've got wine on the brain tonight, Heather.
A what?
You sound like you've got wine on the brain tonight.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
Okay.
I don't drink, but I might after this.
Can I speak to? Can I speak to what the different views are as far as heaven and hell with different Christian sects?
Sure.
I mean, you can, but I think we already kind of addressed that with the first part. But I'm perfectly fine hearing it.
Well, I just wanted to say, so there are a couple of different views. There's the C.S. Lewis view that basically says that people are going to have a choice after this life, which you can read about in his book, The Great Divorce. And then there's a view from traditional, more conservative Christians that there's a heaven and hell. And then there's another view that Catholics think that there's a heaven and there's a hell, but there's also a purgatory, which would be kind of similar to what C.S. Lewis thinks, as far as there's that time between now and the end times. At the end times is when there's the hell and the lake of fire and that kind of stuff. So different Christians have different views on that. And I think if we just recall that God is moral and God is fair, and so the punishment will fit the crime. So that's just something to add to that.
Okay. Cyrus?
So I know it might be a little bit of a red herring to latch onto the punishment might fit the crime, but in an ideal world, would you agree that all punishments would fit their individual crimes?
Yes, all punishments do fit the crime.
Okay. Can you think of a single crime that would warrant an eternal punishment?
David, you've seen that the format's gone all wonky, right?
There's two basic things that we're supposed to do: love the Lord as our Lord, and to love each other as we love ourselves. So
okay, and
those are the two laws we're supposed to follow. So if you don't follow those, that might be a crime that's worth eternal death.
Okay, so if
you've got a Christian like me who says that. That's why I agree with you.
That the hell isn't there in the first place.
Yeah, because it doesn't work.
True, and that's fair. That's where the semantics of the conversation break down. If you are like for me an ocean, it pretty much just gets into the free will only aspect. We can't really talk about the heaven and the hell aspect in his worldview because they're not the same things. But on the love is something that should be eternally punished if it's not there. So if I'm the average human being and I live, let's say roughly, 82 years for a male right now. Unfortunately, I don't live as long as a female. I'm kind of screwed by genetics. But if I'm living for 82 years, and so let's assume that I have the capacity to love God for every single one of those years. We'll take the age of reason out of the argument. So for 82 years, I did not love God, scratching the fact that for 23 years I did. So for 82 years, I did not love God. And then my punishment was an eternity in hell. How can those 82 years be equated to an eternity in any worldview?
And before somebody answers, I just want to point this out. We are aware of the layout. It's being taken care of. We had some people drop out due to some other things that they had going on. So that will be fixed in just a second. Just bear with us on that. And who wants to follow up on that point?
Well, I'll just say that a just God is perfectly just, so he can figure it all out. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. But I will agree with the fact that there are different Christian views on who goes to heaven and who does not. And so you have, on one end, universalism, I think somebody brought up, and it is a one Christian view that eventually all people will be saved, and that nobody goes to hell. That is one view. It's extreme. It's on one end. And then way on the other end, there's another Christian view, and that is restrictivism. Okay, and so that is very conservative, and you have to do A, B, C, D, and E, and follow all of these things, and only those people go to heaven. And then you have this middle ground, where, there's inclusivism and you have divine perseverance. Some Christians say that people will be given another chance after they die, because we are taught in the New Testament that you're not done when your body dies. Your soul goes on. And not only that, that person who died will come back. Actually, everybody will be resurrected. I mean, that's what the New Testament teaches. So that's like for another whole show, right? But you have different
ambiguity, not an issue, though.
What's that?
Is that interpretive ambiguity not an issue?
Well, you have different views. So depending on which view you take, you're going to define certain verses a certain way.
So
that's
Christianity
true,
is subjective.
Yeah, and that's true, and I think that's where the conversation broke down. Well, not necessarily broke down, but where the argument breaks down in the first question that came up. If you are personally from a denomination that does not have the hell doctrine or has a different version of the hell doctrine, for instance, one where it's finite and you get saved afterwards, or it's finite and you have a second chance whenever the second coming happens, obviously in each of those worldviews, it's a little the semantics of the argument are a little bit different, and at that point it would come down to, again, a lot of different semantics, like when does the second coming happening? What happens when those people who are cast out are revived and are brought up into heaven or are given a second chance? What happens when anything like that goes on? A lot of that is semantics, and the problem, though, is that the semantics are not what I'm addressing. I'm addressing an issue of fundamentals. No matter how many denominations and how many semantics you insert into the argument, and I'm not saying you're trying to do it. I don't want to strawman you into being dishonest. That's not my intent. But no matter how many semantics from other different denominations are brought into the argument, it doesn't change the question, and the question is being addressed to a fundamental. It's like if I'm questioning a Hindu and a Taoist responds, well, that's wonderful that the Taoist had a response, but it doesn't answer from the Hindu that I was trying to get the question sent to in the first place.
We're going to have to wrap it up there. I tried to get a 2-minute warning in there, but I decided just to let it go because that's a good wrapping up spot on.
I just want to add 20 seconds. Saris, by the way, you're 50 subs away from 1,000, so we put the link to your video channel in the video description, or we will put it in the description, also in the live feed. So let's get him to 1,000. Also, I think that you made a very good comment, and that kind of got glazed over. You said something along the lines of, you weren't the God I was expecting, or something like that. And if all these different denominations and young earth creationists and everybody who has very vastly different views all make it to heaven, maybe some of them might be upset they didn't have it right here on earth. I mean, they might be actually feel like they were lied to and go, hey, you weren't the God we were expecting.
If a Calvinist and an Episcopalian both make it to heven and the same God is there.
See, exactly. And the wars of heaven because of that. Exactly. My point. Very good.
The pagan's like the little devil in the middle, I think.
I know. Osha could throw a grenade at me.
It's my history of
there's
being
me.
By the way, congrats, sirs. Guys, go. So let's hit. Let's let him get 1,000 tonight. I think that's awesome. Congratulations, sirs. You deserve it, definitely.
I definitely want to say that I didn't expect to have a random shout out in the middle of this, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Who are you again? Wait, who? No, I'm kidding.
I know that the issue is that we're all from opposite sides, but we're all also somewhat friends in some regards.
Absolutely.
Subscribe to
you. We all need each other. We all need each other. Okay, now we go to our main event tonight. The power duo. Let's hear from Shannon and Paul.
Strap in, boys and girls.
Sorry. Let's hear from Shannon, Paul, and Vice Rhino again.
Both of us believed in God.
It meant everything to us. It colored how we saw the world. It gave us meaning, and it gave us strength.
Then one day, we couldn't. We had questions, we had doubts, and they couldn't be answered.
We searched. We wanted to, and we tried. We struggled to make ourselves believe again, but we couldn't pretend we did without knowing that it was a lie.
So here's our question.
Can a person simply choose to believe in something that they are not convinced of?
If not, and God created our brains to require a certain level of evidence in order to be convinced, why has he chosen to not provide that level of evidence for us?
Even though we both wanted to believe.
Even cartoon Shannon and Paul are too cute. But you know what they say? Couples that stream together beam together. So don't forget that. Which theist would like?
I'll begin. I'll just be really short. Yeah, I'll just be really short.
Before we do that, I'm just going to transition back to the video with those two, because that's got the correct layout of you guys. This one doesn't. So.
Sure. Yeah, that's no problem.
That should be fine. We'll just end with them in the center.
Yeah, we forgot to do the ear thing, Steve, when the producer speaks.
Whatever you need, Dave.
Oh, the outside couldn't hear him?
Okay.
The outside heard him? Okay, I'm sorry. Let me try that again.
The outside can hear me.
Okay, the producer's saying. Thank you.
And back to our senior theist correspondent, Heather.
Back to you.
So I'll just say that two really big pieces of evidence would be creation. If you can explain how
Can I
creation...
stop you? Because that's not addressing the question. That's not addressing the question. We weren't asking for what's good evidence. The question at its core is, can a person choose to be compelled to believe something? Is it within my control to be compelled to believe something? Is that something I can actively control? If so, what's the mechanism for that? And if God controls that mechanism, why does he not allow that mechanism to be active for me?
Well, it sounds like you're referring to free will, perhaps. And so I would say you do have the ability to choose, yes.
You can choose something you believe.
I think she's referring to doxastic and voluntarism more so. Can you choose your beliefs? Can you be forced to choose your beliefs? Is that correct, Shannon?
Because in this scenario, both of us were very, very devout theists who went on a path that was intended to reinforce our beliefs. And that path, unbeknownst to us, when we started upon it, led us away. And we struggled, and there were death pangs, and we did not want to let it go. But we had to come to the honest decision that we had that we could no longer believe, whether we wanted to or not. It was no longer our choice.
Well, why not?
Control. Why not?
Can I answer that?
Yes, please do.
Yeah,
I would love to hear an answer.
So no, I think in your particular case, Heather, I'm sorry, I mean Shannon. I think that you didn't wait long enough. I mean, you didn't try long enough. You're very young. I look at you. I think you said you're 36 or something like that. You're a very young woman, and you obviously spent a part of your life where you were a theist and you were looking. And it kind of reminds me of myself. I was looking for many years. I've always been a theist and I've always believed, but I've gravitated and moved about and checked out different faiths and that kind of thing. But I didn't find God until conclusively and definitively until I was in my 40s. And
Paul was in his 40s when he stopped believing. The question pertains to both of us. So the I'm too young doesn't apply to Paul.
No, I'm not trying to say you're too young. I'm just saying if you give
it's
it
not
more
specific
time,
to me. There's other people who have the same experience that I do, and that still doesn't speak towards the mechanism that allows a person to make a choice whether or not they are or are not compelled to believe something.
Because God draws you in, and he draws you in when you're ready for him. And so if you felt like you're ready for a relationship with God, or it's in your heart that you're ready for a relationship with God, I wasn't ready. For many years, I wasn't ready. I was busy making fun of people who went to church. I was going to the pool on Sunday mornings, our public pool, because I thought it was fun because nobody was there, because my neighborhood is very theistic, very Christian. And my kids ended up being the ones who sort of brought me back to the church. And I'm very thankful of that. But it took me a long time. So, and many years of waffling about and wondering, is there, where's the Lord? Why is he not answering my prayers?
Sure, but SJ,
those aren't
we both had. It's not that we weren't ready. We were both in it, and loved it. We were both in it and loved it. So, but we now no longer can intellectually hold the arguments any longer. So I guess I would love for one of you to answer, can you choose what you believe? And if so, can you give me an example of something you've chosen to believe, even if you weren't convinced?
Without self-deception, Paul?
Without self-deception.
Because I think you could choose your belief.
Yes, you can.
Self-deception, but without self-deception, can you choose your belief? I think that's a better way to word it. Would it not be?
There's a bigger objection that's being made by the two of them. Are you guys are aware of the divine hiddenness argument?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
I know you are,
kind
Steve.
of talking about that in a way.
It seems like it's related. Shannon and Paul, are you guys familiar with the divine hiddenness argument?
Yes.
Is that the one that says that God is not self-evident?
No. So the idea is basically, they're non-resistant non-believers, which is the kind of the point that they're trying to make. And I think that people generally can make the case that, you have people that are non-resistant non-believers. I consider myself one as far as Christians are concerned.
Me too.
And if God is omnipotent and wants his message to be known and wants a relationship with you, so he's all powerful and wants a relationship with you, why is it that non-resistant non-believers, people that aren't putting up a wall and genuinely searching for truth, why aren't they finding God quickly? Like
it's a matter of the will.
And I don't even think that's necessarily it.
Then what is it?
I don't think that's necessarily it, because it ultimately does come down to a question of free will, whether or not you can be compelled to believe something by choice. Like whether or not you can, I've heard the argument, well, there's evidence all around you. I could present it to you and people show me that evidence. Now that evidence, if another version of me was sitting next to me, could be compelling perhaps to that version of me. Well, it couldn't be a version of me because then we'd be identical, but another person could be sitting next to me and be compelled by it. We could be both seeing it in real time, simultaneously, the same evidence. This person could be compelled. Well, I am not, even though we're both honestly considering that evidence at the same time, in the same fashion. This person is compelled, yet I am not. Is that because I am choosing to not be compelled? Or is that because it's out of my control, what's compelling to me?
No, it is in your control.
Well, then why don't I believe in God if God exists and he wants me to love him?
But
let me let Craig jump in real quick.
That's your personal decision.
I don't believe it was.
Let me let Craig jump in, guys. Hold on one second. Craig, go ahead.
Well, it gets complicated the way she set it up. There are behaviors, there are things that you can do in real time right now. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that I'm telling you the truth. Let's assume that I'm not lying and I'm not deluding myself, that I am perceiving a reality that is in fact there. Now, there are things that you could choose to do to line up and see that reality as I see it and experience that reality as I see it. But the first step is you got to kind of sort of believe me. You don't have to completely believe me, but you can't say, well, he's a complete crackpot, fake, lying apologist. You would have to kind of sort of believe me. When I was in the debate on Friday, one guy, he sent me this really angry tirade video, but he actually heard me. And he kind of sort of, I was telling him, look, there is I don't have it completely nailed down yet because I'm very new at this, but there is a sort of personal methodology that can be spelled out to somebody.
And that's actually that's the point of the question. There's a level of evidence that's convinced all of you. Right. That level of evidence is not convincing myself or Shannon. We've heard it all. I've heard every
personal reasons. You have personal.
No, that is an assumption by you. That is an assumption by you and doesn't speak to the mechanism by which people make choice.
And see, as a theist who came to the conception the exact opposite way of you, Shannon.
Okay.
I was a dead set atheist, and at some point, it just all made sense to me.
Did you have a choice in that decision, or were you compelled to do it?
And no, I didn't. And I'm actually on your side on this, Shannon. I'm actually on your side on this. I've taken a basic logic 101 class for me in college. There's no way that, we can change that internal processor for us. Whatever logic circuits in our brain, we can fine tune them and hone them, and really study the evidence. And if you are somewhat aligned to follow a certain way, you can drag yourself that direction. But for someone like you or someone like me who's studied all the evidence and is convinced of one interpretation of evidence being correct, I think my fellow theists are doing a real disservice to say, well, it's just a matter of will. She's saying that she has willed with all of her being. It's like me being gay. I'm a gay Christian. I spent a decade willing and
there you go,
willing
Kyle.
and
I told you.
myself to be straight. Willing and willing and willing and willing myself to be straight. And it did not work. Why? Because it's something fundamental about myself. And my beliefs are the same thing. It's my mind taking the information I have possible and me being as objective as I possibly can. But it's still, at least in part, a fundamental process of my mind, the same way that the sexual orientation is a fundamental process of how my emotional being and my sexual preferences are built into me.
So if being an atheist isn't a choice, any more than being a theist is a choice, then what's wrong with being an atheist? Because I had no choice.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy into it.
Okay.
What
have
about
you
it?
chosen to believe?
I just don't buy into it. I believe you do have a choice.
Heather, tell me one thing that you can choose to believe that you're not convinced of.
Ask her if she can choose to be an atheist.
Or can you choose? Yeah, can you choose to be an atheist? Could you?
I could choose to be an atheist, but I'm not. I've seen the evidence, and
well, that means you're convinced. Choose. That means you're convinced. So you but could you, if I held a gun to your head and said, I will shoot you unless you honestly believe that there's a dragon on your head. Could you really in your head, you could say that you did, but could you really in your heart believe that there was a dragon on your head?
Yeah, I think we're getting a little off track with.
No, this is exactly on track.
Oh, but this is the question.
Not on track.
Yeah,
you're right on the track, Heather.
That's actually a perfect question to ask for that. Actually.
Yeah, I don't buy into it. Either you're going to do some homework. No, either you're going to do some homework and find out. And so tell me, then how did the creation come about?
Because I don't have the answer to the ultimate origin of the universe. That doesn't equal God.
Convinced of
let me say this real quick. Let me say that. Hold on 1 second.
Okay, well, I already know.
Dylan, hold on 1 second, Heather. Dylan, this is a perfect opportunity for you to say your tagline right now.
What's his tagline?
Just because you don't know the answer doesn't mean you can make one up.
Yeah, and I think this question is the core, Heather. I didn't realize I was muted. I think what Paul asked is a very specific pinpoint question, a very fair question to ask you in relationship to Shannon's and Paul's question. I mean, can you willfully choose to believe something? And I don't think you can. I don't think you can just say, I want to believe there's a dragon in my head, therefore I believe there's a dragon ahead. You cannot do that in any way that does not involving self-deception.
Well, see, that's not even dealing with truth. And so
we're not asking.
But we're talking about beliefs. We're talking about beliefs.
I'm talking about truth.
But she's asking, can you choose your beliefs?
But that doesn't make it true.
It doesn't have to be true. Truth is irrelevant in this case. We're talking about, can you choose your beliefs? You can choose to have a false belief, but I don't think you can. I think you don't think you can choose any of your beliefs. But their question is, can you choose your beliefs? And if not, then how you're accountable for them.
Correct.
And I'm saying you can choose your beliefs.
I don't see how.
Can you choose to believe the dragon is on your head?
Okay, are you sitting down or are you standing up? Do you know the truth? Are you going to admit the truth of whether you're sitting down or standing up?
Give us another example of something that you can convince yourself to believe. Give us another example outside of religion that you can actually convince yourself to believe that is not true.
Because I don't think you could choose to be atheist right now if you tried. You could say that, okay, I'm an atheist, but you're not actually believing that. You don't have that belief in your psychology.
But even that aside, give us an example of something else.
Your question there, when you say give us an example of something that's not true that you force yourself to believe, is actually a leading question because you're making the implication.
You're framing.
That's fair.
It's not leading at all.
I'm with that. That is fair for SJ. That's fair because it leads that Christianity, by definition, isn't true, and that it infers that we're correct, which isn't the point of the question.
Okay, here's another example. Okay,
Yes.
here's another example. So Mickey Mouse is the president. So am I going to buy into that? I know it's not true. So what you're saying is I don't have a choice. You're saying I don't have a choice. This is how you're positioning it. I don't have a choice whether or not to believe Mickey Mouse is the president because he's not the president. So I don't really have a choice.
Can you convince yourself that Mickey Mouse is actually the president?
Yeah, can we take something just a little bit more? Hold on. Let's
Can I take the dragon in the garage?
Can
I do the dragon?
Oh, not the dragon in the garage.
I'll take the dragon in the garage.
Oh, Ocean, I want to hear your thing.
Yeah, I want to hear your thing.
Let's say I put a jar of pennies on the table. All right, and I tell you that in the jar of pennies is an even number of pennies. Could you believe me?
Yeah,
I could logically believe you.
Right, but could you choose to believe me, or could you choose not to believe me?
I could be convinced though. So the question really is about what you're convinced of versus what you believe. Like I could convince myself that there was an even number.
But belief is convincing. When you're convinced of something, you believe it.
Right. So I guess the question is, do I?
So are you guys citing that you can choose your beliefs at this point?
No.
I meant this question towards Heather.
I'm just saying it's not a great example because
the penny example doesn't work.
But either way,
because it has to be one or the other in that scenario too. It's either even or odd.
But the information coming in,
the
beliefs kind of choose us. The way I look at it, everything's processed, and then whatever comes out, that's what our beliefs are formulated from. We don't sit there and go, I want this belief to be, therefore I believe this. I think it's just we process, we have our beliefs, and then as more information comes in, we change our beliefs.
I want to go back and forth with Shannon a little bit on this, because the reason why I did the penny thing is because it's pretty similar to the God belief.
Well, not necessarily, because there's multiple versions of the God belief.
Well, yeah, but either God exists or he doesn't. In your scenario,
it's either even or odd, so it's a matter of probabilities.
Right,
so I've got a 50-50
God exists or he doesn't exist. Right?
It's God or gods. You believe in multiple.
Right, I believe in multiple gods, but when we're looking at the options here, as far as like believe or not believe, that's a binary choice.
Or you either believe that God exists, but you can have multi-thing in logic. You can say
probably
believe it exists, doesn't exist, or unknown.
Okay, did he want to address me, or is he?
Sorry.
Am I involved?
Kind of.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm looking at it as God exists or God does not exist.
Okay.
And that's why the jar of pennies is sitting there, because that's a binary choice. So you could come up with a myriad of other, maybe there's a nickel in there or something like that, but do you think that you can choose to believe that there's an even number of pennies or choose not to believe there's an even number of pennies if I tell you there's an even number of pennies?
I feel like belief in this specific scenario is more like a measurement of probable outcomes. So I'm not invested necessarily in that belief.
Right. Well, why?
There's a 50-50 probability that there's going to be an even amount or an odd amount. I know it's one of the two.
Okay, well, let's make it different. Let's say there's 20.
There is a 100% chance that it is one of those two.
Okay.
There is a 100% chance that one of those answers is correct.
Let's make it more reflective.
Let me finish. With the God proposition, I don't believe the probabilities are the same. I don't have sufficient evidence to know that there is 100% probability that one or the other answer is the same. So the probabilities aren't the same.
Right. So let's make it more comparative.
So it's a false analogy.
Let's say that I put a jar of pennies on the table and I say there's 2,056 pennies on there inside the jar.
I'd probably reject that because I don't have.
Okay. The question and the question as I was wording it is putting it towards Heather. Could you will yourself to believe that there are 2,056 pennies inside of this jar?
But Ocean, there's two different things here. You're asking, is somebody convinced that it's even or not? And you're asking Heather, can she will herself to believe something? Those are two different things.
Okay, well, I have an answer. I don't know if you want to hear it or not.
Convince yourself to believe it is what I was trying to ask.
I'd like to hear
how. Trying to make it related.
You're distracting from our question. Let's go to question, please.
Okay, so for the pennies, I agree with Shannon that, it's 50-50. Either it's going to be even or it's going to be odd. And so I don't know if it's going to be, I don't know. But that situation is unique and it cannot really directly apply to does God exist or not exist, because the evidence for God existing is so much more than God not existing. So if you want to let me finish. So if you want to compare probability Okay, because we were looking at the pennies. So if you want to compare probability, okay, forget the pennies. If you want to compare the probability, I have already considered, hey, are these atheists right? What case do they have? And you know what? Every time they do not want to give any reason to believe that God does not exist. And they have no case. And then they say, oh, all the burden of proof is on you. And you know what? Fine. Okay. Then let's go through the 16 ways to know God exists one at a time.
Do you think we haven't?
Yeah, I mean, I know I have. I know the 5 ways.
Left.
I've gone through every one of them.
We've got 2 minutes though, so I want to hold on. I want to get focused back on the question at hand in these last 2 minutes before we close out. So I'm gonna let Shannon take it from here and kind of address who she wants to, and Paul as well, to kind of wrap this up. So
I'll let Paul go because I ran roughshod, so I do that. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, as I would say, this is a question, again, we're talking about a question Christians won't answer. They refuse to answer this question. And we've asked over and over, can you choose to believe something you're not convinced of? We're not here to talk about, am I convinced? Should I be convinced? Why is my brain not convinced? Can you be convinced of something you're not believing? Can you believe something you're not convinced of? And you guys have not given a single example.
No, I would say yes.
Hold on, Heather. Let him finish. And then you go.
I asked you several times and you did not. So I wish you would have taken the opportunity sooner. That said, okay, let's try. So and then again, given I think most of the people listening will agree, based on the answers you're given, if you are not convinced, you can't believe. And so why would we be accountable to a God? Just think about that for yourself as extra homework. Why would God make us accountable for a thing that we cannot be convinced of?
Okay, Paul, real quick, Paul, do you think it's easier for God to keep the believer believing or to convince a non-believer to believe? Because you guys were already believers. Both you and Shannon were firm believers. Wouldn't it have been easier for God to just keep you believing?
This is the same answer. It's like, is it cheaper to recruit a customer or to keep a customer? I mean, in economics, of course, it's cheaper to keep a customer. It's cheaper when someone's in the pews to keep them going. The momentum shift of flipping over from one side to the other obviously takes, and it doesn't matter either way. The momentum to create a believer out of a non-believer, or vice versa, I think is obviously more significant than to stay in the rut you're in.
Because it might be twice as hard to get you back to be a believer now for God if you wanted to.
Possibly.
Well, it shouldn't be hard for God because He's God.
Yeah. Shannon, the last
words
go to you to wrap up the questions, and then we'll close out.
I'm glad that we got to address this question directly because it got strawman significantly as a request for more evidence or better evidence or for God to prove Himself, and that is not the question at hand. So for future people that wish to address this question, please refer to this. Because it is not about the evidence that is provided. It is not about the quality of the evidence. And it is not even about myself or Paul as individuals. It is not about our motivations. It is about the mechanisms by which any human can decide to believe in something and whether or not that is inside or outside of their control. And if it is outside of their control, whether or not they can or cannot believe in God, then no God has the right to hold them accountable for something that they cannot control because He made them that way.
Can I comment on that? Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah, very quickly because we're pushing time.
I just want to point out real fast. I mean, it does say in the Bible, and I know that you don't believe in the Bible, but it does make it very clear that everyone is provided with evidence of God. So
wasn't a request for evidence.
That's not the question.
Okay, now, guys in the chat, press 1 if the question was answered, 2 if not. And from what me and Steve have been looking at, it's overwhelmingly what, Steve? What's 2. Okay, so.
I honestly don't think I've seen a 1 yet, and now that
Team
I
Marvel,
it, people will just be, but I don't think I've seen a 1 yet. I mean, I've been trying to do 4 to 5 different things.
I've seen a few ones actually, but
yeah, I mean, I might have missed a few.
Okay, hold on, guys. Let's not break up off yet. I want to announce something real quick, and then we're going to close out. And I'm going to thank everybody here for coming by. Starting the first week in June on Fridays, we're going to start doing this thing called Debate Roulette. Basically, what will happen is you'll come on Fridays at 8:00. We will. Me and Steve will go over some things that we've got coming up in the introduction, and then while that's happening, a chat bot that we're working on will spit out a topic. Now, if you agree or disagree with that topic, you'll press 1 or 2. The bot can select a person from each group to debate. So you're only going to participate. You're only going to come and press 1 or 2 if you want to participate. Now, those 2 people that are selected will be pulled in. We'll do 2 of these each Friday night. So random topic that you won't know until the show starts, and then 2 random people selected to come in and debate. So that will be the first Friday in June, and depending on how that goes, it may be the only one. But then again, we may continue it. So we'll see how that works out. I want to thank all of you guys for joining us tonight and with these questions, especially Vice Rhino. Shannon, were you going to do something after?
She muted.
Yeah, Shannon's gone.
Shannon, you're muted.
We can't lip read. We can't lip read.
Paul, could you just speak for her like you do usually? Anyways, what is she saying?
Was I muted?
Yes.
Yes.
Like you're saying.
Sorry. Yeah, probably within the next 30 minutes to an hour on my channel. Because I do that now, because apparently I YouTube like a YouTuber, I guess, or whatever.
So join Shannon for another one of her crucifixion live streams. It'll be great.
Yeah, and everyone is, all the theists are welcome.
But yeah, thank you guys for joining us. This was fantastic. Everything went smooth. There was not an issue, and it was great, except for the little tech thing. But we couldn't help that. So Steve, got anything that you want to say before we close out?
No, Cyrus, you're almost there. Let's get him over the top, guys. Come on, he only needs like 40 more or something. And like I said, the link to his YouTube channel is in the video description. Let's just get him there.
Awesome.
And anyways, guys, I do want to appreciate all you guys that answered, whether we thought your answers were great or not. The fact that you even took time out to do it, and that SJ, you're typing up and transcribing of all that and whatever, that was awesome. And I have put your blog in the video description, so if people want to go back to this video and actually see the questions written out, because I think it might help, I'm referring them to your blog. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
all
you,
right,
Steve.
Guys. We'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock.
Is there a transcript of this?
There will be on YouTube.
There will be when it processes through the closed caption. Well, it's the YouTube version of it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.